Slavery. It's a vile word, and the practice is pretty much as old as human civilization itself. We're talking ancient history, and frankly, it still exists today. Just about every culture on every continent has had some form of it. Now, when you hear the slave trade, your mind probably jumps straight to the transatlantic route, right? The mass forced migration of African slaves to the Western Hemisphere from the 1500s to the mid-1800s, and it was colossal. Estimates say 10 to 13 million Africans were brought to the New World. But there's another story, a chapter that most major powers would rather you just forget. 60 years before the American Civil War, the United States fought a war on foreign soil to stop the white slave trade. Hold on. What? White slave trade? Yes, it's a forgotten piece of history. Who were these Barbary pirates, and how did a handful of U.S. Marines pull off the impossible? Let's rewind to the late 18th, early 19th century. The world is on fire. The Napoleonic Wars are raging, and pretty much every nation in Europe is trying to destroy the others. And right in the middle of all this chaos, the transatlantic slave trade is booming. It's big business. This is when Thomas Jefferson becomes the third president of the United States, and he's got a lot on his plate. The Louisiana Purchase, a massive deal that doubled the size of the country. The Lewis and Clark Expedition, he launched that. And of course, the issue of slavery itself. Jefferson called the international slave trade a violation of human rights. He even got Congress to ban the importation of slaves from Africa. But here's the forgotten part. Jefferson was the first president to send the U.S. military into direct action overseas. Why? To fight the Barbary Pirates. So, who were these guys? The pirates of the Barbary Coast in North Africa were, basically, state-sponsored sea gangsters. They'd capture ships, steal cargo, enslave the crews, and demand enormous ransoms. Before America won its independence, our merchant ships were protected by the power of the British Royal Navy. But as soon as we won the Revolutionary War, that protection vanished. The pirates immediately put a target on our backs, and they didn't just stick to the seas. They launched raids on the coasts of France, Italy, and Sicily. They even raided as far inland as Iceland to kidnap people and drag them back to North Africa. Their main prize? White women? They were highly valued in the North African slave markets. Under Islamic law, or Sharia, while you couldn't enslave a fellow Muslim, non-Muslims were fair game. Over 300 years, it's estimated that 1 million Europeans were captured and enslaved, including many American sailors. Just let that number sink in. For a while, the United States just paid them off. Congress literally passed a law authorizing tribute payments. Think about that. Paying gangsters to leave you alone seemed cheaper than losing ships and men. But Jefferson hated it. He called it a modern Danegeld, a reference to when Saxon England paid the Vikings not to attack. And just like back then, it didn't work. Just weeks after Jefferson took office, Tripoli started attacking American merchant ships again. The ruler, Pasha Yusuf Karamanli, felt the Americans weren't showing him enough respect or giving him enough cash. He was already at war with Sweden over tribute, and now he decided to threaten the U.S. On May 14, 1801, he officially declared war on the United States by, get this, chopping down the flagpole at the American consulate in Tripoli. A direct act of war. In response, Jefferson sent Commodore Richard Dale and a squadron to the Mediterranean to blockade Tripoli's harbor. Dale only found out war had been declared when he reached Gibraltar, but he got right to work. By the way, the Ottoman Sultan in Istanbul, Selim III, was not thrilled about this. He was trying to modernize his empire and, believe it or not, wanted to eliminate the white slave trade. But his regional leaders in North Africa, who loved the profitable business, basically revolted against him. The American blockade seriously hurt the Barbary Pirates, but in 1803 things went south. The frigate USS Philadelphia ran aground in Tripoli Harbor. Its 307-man crew was captured and held for ransom. This is where Navy Lieutenant Stephen Decatur enters the scene. On February 16, 1804, he pulled off one of the most audacious raids in U.S. naval history. He snuck into Tripoli Harbor, under the cover of darkness, boarded the captured Philadelphia, and set it on fire so the enemy couldn't use it. It was an incredible act of bravery. But the Pasha was furious and demanded an even more insane ransom for the American hostages, threatening to execute them if he wasn't paid. Jefferson decided he'd had enough. He ordered a ground operation. The plan: an ex-consul named William Eaton and a U.S. Marine Corps First Lieutenant, Presley O'Bannon, would lead a force of, listen to this, just 8 U.S. Marines and 500 mercenaries, a mix of Greeks, Arabs, and Berbers. Their mission was an insane 500-mile march across the desert from Alexandria, Egypt, to capture the city of Derna. Eaton was the overall commander, but he was tough and arrogant. He struggled to control the undisciplined mercenaries. But O'Bannon and his 8 Marines did things differently. They lived and breathed with the mercenaries. They shared their food, their water, and their hardships. They earned their trust, not by looking down on them, but by respecting their faith and their culture. O'Bannon knew that many of these men had either been hostages themselves or had lost family to the white slave trade. The march wasn't just hard, it was brutal. There were mutinies and desertions. But in late April, they finally reached the port city of Bomba, where U.S. Navy ships were waiting with supplies. On April 26th, the attack on Derna began. Lieutenant O'Bannon and his Marines led the charge with a group of Greek gunners. Eaton's force got pinned down by heavy musket fire, but O'Bannon pushed his men through a hailstorm of bullets and took the fort. It was chaos. Eaton was even wounded in the wrist. But by 4 p.m., O'Bannon raised the American flag over the captured city. They had just defeated a force 4 times their size. The hostages were freed, and the Navy sank the pirate ships in the harbor. Yusuf reluctantly signed a peace treaty on June 10, 1805. The Barbary Pirates were finally broken. The active white slave trade from North Africa was effectively over. It was an impossible feat that went down in history.